All right, so we're going to do an example from what we learned in class on Thursday. And we want to simplify the following expression. So this one's a little different than some of the ones we saw because there's 3 terms, but we do the steps the same way. So our first step is going to be to factor the denominators. Okay, factor the denominators. So 1 over x plus 1, that's already factored, minus x over x minus 2, that's already factored. But if I look at my third one, I've got a quadratic there. So I want to see, since the leading coefficient is 1, all I have to do is ask myself, what adds to negative 1? What adds to negative 1 and multiplies to negative 2? Well, that's going to be negative 2 and positive 1. So my factors are going to be x minus 2 times x plus 1. Okay, so now that they're factored, I can do the next step of finding a common denominator. And remember, I want to find the least common denominator, right? Big emphasis on least. And the reason for that is if we use something other than the least common denominator, we could end up with just bigger numbers than we want to have to deal with, right? So by finding the least common denominator, we keep this as simple as possible. So what I do to find the least common denominator is I start with my first fraction, and I just write down the denominator because I know it's going to have to be part of the denominator. Okay, then I look at my second fraction, and I see if the denominator of my second fraction or any part of it is already in my common denominator. And it's not in this case, so I need to add x minus 2. And then I move on to the next fraction. And if I look at this fraction, well, I've already accounted for the x minus 2 and I've already accounted for the x plus 1. So I don't need to add them again. I'm good to call my LCD x plus 1 times x minus 2. All right, for the third step, we're going to multiply the top and bottom of each fraction by what is missing from the common denominator. So remember, we multiply the top and bottom because if I multiply just the bottom, well, I'm changing the expression, right? There's no equal sign here. So we have to keep the expression equal. But if I multiply by 2 over 2, that's like multiplying by 1. So it's okay. So let me just rewrite the fraction down here. All right, so if I look at my first fraction, I'm missing the x minus 2 from the denominator, so I need to add it to the top and bottom. If I look at my second fraction, I'm missing the x plus 1. That's a very bad plus 1. So I multiply the top and bottom by x plus 1. And then my third fraction isn't missing anything. And now notice all 3 terms have a common denominator. So I'm going to rewrite it. Because we want to be careful. We want to make sure we're writing out these steps so that we don't accidentally mess anything up. So if I multiply this through 1 times x minus 2, it's just x minus 2. So x minus 2 over x plus 1 times x minus 2. And then x times x plus 1 gives us x squared plus x all over x minus 2 times x plus 1. And then we've still got that x squared plus 2 over x minus 2 times x plus 1. Okay, and then our next step is to add and subtract across the top, and the denominator stays the same. So we're going to have one big fraction now where our denominator stays the same, so it's going to be x plus 1 times x minus 2, and we've got to, combine the numerators. So x minus 2 minus, now keep in mind, we're subtracting this whole fraction. So it's going to be minus x squared plus x squared plus 2. Okay, and then our last step is to simplify when possible. So we're going to need to distribute this negative in and then combine like terms. So we'll have x minus 2 minus x squared minus x squared plus 2 all over x plus 1 times x minus 2. Well, let's see. 2 minus 2 cancels. X squared minus x, negative x squared plus x squared cancels, and x minus x cancels. So we're actually left with 0 over x plus 1 times x minus 2, and that's just going to give us 0, because 0 divided by anything is 0. So who would have thought that at the beginning with this, that this is actually equal to 0? But when it's all simplified, said, and done, we get 0.